So the question that keeps coming up, I've mentioned it a few times that you've said once that we need to be reconciled to the land. And I
Mm.
have mentioned that in a few different UU spaces and elsewhere, actually, in the work that I do. And people always ask, what does that mean? And I've done my best to try to explain what it means, but can you explain in your own words what you have been taught and what you understand that to mean?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, just to say it's not an easy discussion topic, talking about land because I think for me as a Métis person or from an Indigenous perspective in general, and then uh, from a Western perspective, uh, land is seen totally different. Um, and so, but I guess I'll start off with the idea that like colonization starts with land. So the whole beginning of colonization or the colonial process is really rooted in land. So it was people coming here from another land to possess this land. So that's the root. And then there's all kinds of things uh, that justify the possession of this land from a Western perspective. And but the reality is that that's what colonization is rooted in. So it's not rooted necessarily in uh, just from a human to human relationship. There always is this other um, uh, living part of colonization, which is the land. And then and so that's what it's rooted in. So to discuss reconciliation, there has to be some ways of also discussing what our relationships are with the land. The other piece of that is really like what does all of humanity have in common besides being human is that we all live here. Um, and so when we're talking about the places that we live, again, that is totally related to colonization or the colonial process, but also to reconciliation, because it is when we understand our relationship with the lands that we live in that becomes quite significant. And so, because we have this common denominator, which is land, and in many ways we've broken that relationship with land. We've broken the relationship we should have with land. And as like many elders say, like they would say Europeans actually still have one foot in the European continent. So they never fully came here and embraced the land. They still identify themselves often from um, uh, from an identity that's based on the European continent. And so part of the whole process would be like that the common denominator is land. And so as we begin to develop a right relationship with the land, so that is understanding that land has agency, that land is life, the land gives us life, um, that we belong to a land, and that and in a sense the land, more than us possessing the land possesses us as people, is the way we would typically understand it. And as we kind of look at that, and we kind of shift some of our views and see this place, the lands that we live in, as the where we have all things in common. None of us can live without the land. Can't feed ourselves. without the land. We desperately need the land. Um, but we've taken full advantage of the land in terrible ways and need to, first of all, reconcile ourselves to the land. Both, like I would say, many indigenous peoples and groups need to do the same thing as Europeans, and that is reconcile ourselves to the land. And as we do that, I think it opens the door for us to reconcile with each other. And as we grow in a relationship with the land, we will only become healthier as a people. And I think like there, excuse me, I think like there's a Anishinaabe word which I'm not going to remember right now, but the translation of that word is basically all of life gives all of life to all of life. And so it's just really a simple concept that the whole meaning of life, like the purpose, the purpose that the land has is to give life. And the purpose that we have as human beings is to give life, but not just life to their like to their own kind, like not just like we have a responsibility to give life to all the life that's around us, beyond just human life. And so there's a responsibility that I believe that the Creator gave us, and that responsibility is to support life, to give life, to work towards life for all of creation. And I believe that responsibility also is given to all the rest of creation. So that's kind of my understanding when we say, reconciliation starts with land. It actually is reconciling ourselves to the land, and that is the beginning, really the beginning of reconciliation. Because out of the healing that comes from that, we'll be able to understand how to relate to each other better.
What practice, like what action, what do we do? Like, surely this isn't just something that happens in our head. Like, what is the action that we do to be reconciled or start to be reconciled?
Yeah. And I think like that's part of the action is, like I would say the action is relationship. Um, so so again, like it's coming back. First of all, I think for like people coming from a Western background, it's to rediscover themselves, the agency that the land has around them. Again, to rediscover land as life, and to rediscover our full dependency on the land for us to survive. And so I think like that relationship, that development of a relationship with the land, is like the beginning point. And how people do that is, I don't think there's any kind of magic to it. I think it's like understanding that that's a reality, and then in your own communities, and in your, individually within your communities and that kind of thing, exploring what that means. And whether it's growing a garden, whether it's producing food, whether it's, taking your canoe out for a little paddle on the water, whether it's going for a hike, but all of that is really important. But beyond that, it's also the has the idea, and I think like within the group here would relate to like our environmental work and the significance. So we're not doing environmental work to save us as humans, but we're doing environmental work to save all of life beyond just human. And so what does that look like? And how do we kind of build our environmental work around significant relationships with the land and with others? And I think like that's also like just when you think of reconciliation, um, from many indigenous people say, there's no real, we're not even at the point of reconciliation because there was never really a right relationship in the first place. And and so um so in a so I think part of it is how to like only you can ask the question, how do I have a relationship within the indigenous communities around me, or if you're far away from indigenous communities, what does that mean for me to work towards reconciling with indigenous people? I think like as you're developing those land-based relationships, you in turn are embracing a relationship with indigenous people because you're beginning to heal and support and give life to the lands that we come from. And so I think like relationship is really like, I'm always kind of simple. I don't like really big complicated answers because you never want to do them. But when it comes down to really simple kinds of things, like reconciliation is just relationship. And if and so where are those connections of relationship, or how do you as a group of environmental workers, how do you make a choice to broaden your relationships, and how do you make a choice to understand, I think too, like it's that piece of understanding another person, but it's also like it's also understanding, um like I think one of the things the land teaches us uh is about diversity. You can't really be on the land without learning about diversity. And you can't be on the land without understanding diversity is really healthy. And so the diversity of voice, you take that to the next step, and it's the diversity of voices, understanding that how a Métis person or a First Nations person or an Inuit person, and even with First Nations, how a Cree person or an Anishinaabe or a Mohawk person sees the world and understands their place in the world so much different than people from the West, from Europe, from Asia, from Africa. There's commonalities, but it's embracing those diversities, um, and those diverse priorities within those cultures too, and learning from them.
That one time when we spoke, you had mentioned about how the land has agency. And so I've
Mm-hmm.
been exploring that more in my own life of just like in simple ways, like if I think about the land that I'm on, that my house is on, and the attitude that I sometimes approach, like I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to move this here, I'm going to put this bush there, like just simple things like that.
Mm.
Your comments about like the land has agency, and in the context of one of your projects, you said, well, we're being with it and seeing what does the land want. Then I kind of just a little double check kind of with myself, going, I might be in a little like overbearing here, like where my way or the highway when it comes to what I want. And then I have a playful banter in my own head about it. I'm like, well, I don't know who else would do with the flower gardens if it's not me. So I'm just trying to figure out, well, how do I be? But I think even just the introduction of those ideas creates a humility. And I think maybe in there is where, all relationships need to have that as a starting point, right? So, yeah,
Yeah,
I've had fun kind of playing around with that in the last little while.
yeah, yeah. Like, and I think in our like I'm always aware of the idea of like how our culture, because I live in the city and I work for like an indigenous organization, but there are so many demands and um so many pressures and places you have to be and rushing around. Just often, even though I work in an indigenous organization, I still find myself driven with that Western um push, right? And to accomplish and be busy. Like being busy is so important. Like being busy gives us some sense of meaning. But yeah, like even to just the need to slow down, um, and these are significant, like when you say these things, like people are like, yeah, we need to slow down. But these are significant moves away from to slow down is an environmental strategy. It really is an environmental strategy. And because in slowing down, we can begin to do things like observe the land, understand what the land is saying to us, what the expectations the land might have on us. And then also, like as we slow down, we begin to we can ask that question, what does the land, because it's a reciprocal relationship, what does the land want to do for me as well? Um, you know, because I believe the land does want to give us life and wants to support our health and well-being. So it's when we slow down, we can begin to ask those questions and begin to hear those answers. And I think being slower is definitely an environmental strategy.